Hello everyone, my name is Guilherme and finally this is the video where I will show you everything that you need to know to understand how to get started and use Cave Engine. I will walk through the samples and how to use the basic UIs and don't get lost in the process. So there's a lot of new stuff here in Cave Engine and I'm very excited to show you everything about it. So in this video we will walk through this all the samples, the first person example, the third person and everything else, and understand the foundations of the game engine. So I'm very excited about that. You can see here that out of the box you will be able to have a bunch of code that will help you to make first person shooters, third person shooters and everything. So enough talking, you find a link to download Cave Engine in the description. Remember, it's free, and you also find the link to my Discord server so we can hang out and talk about your discoveries regarding the game engine. So let's jump to the video. So I'm here with Cave Engine 0.98, and the first thing that you will see when you open the engine is the project manager. This will allow you to select every project that you have, so you can see that I do have all my projects, and it will also show some useful information such as the directory, the last time you wrote, and the Cave Engine version. Keep that in mind that as of this video, the engine is not backwards compatible with 0.97, so if you are using a previous version of the engine, it will show you this warning. You also find some useful information here in about your graphics card. This is helpful to debug if something goes wrong, and the Cave Engine information. You also find a link to the Discord server and the Cave Engine's documentation. The Cave Engine's documentation is where you'll find all the Python logic and everything to understand the engine and use it properly. So let's go ahead and create a new game. So click here, create a new project. Oh, and by the way, you can always right click a project to review it in Explorer or even delete the project if you want. So I'll click here, create a new project, and I'll name it Live YouTube Demo. And I'll click create. And just like that, you have the Cave Engine project open and ready to go. So you will notice that Cave Engine is a very simple and intuitive engine. It is split into tabs here, so you can see that I do have a properties tab, a settings tab, a console tab, asset browser, 3D view, and scene graph by default. You can also rearrange this tab by dragging and dropping them as you want. You can even make them outside the main window, which is cool. So if you want to customize it, you can put tabs together and do whatever you want pretty much. So that's amazing and allows you to customize everything. Some tabs does allow you to hit Ctrl up arrow to maximize them, just like the viewport. So if you are playing the game, you can just maximize it first to get like a full screen experience. If you press Ctrl up arrow, you go back to the normal mode. So let's start with the most important one, the 3D view. This is where you will see your world, and if you hold right mouse button, you will be able to get a first person view, and with that W, A, S, and D, you will be able to move around. If you scroll the mouse wheel, you will be able to go faster or slower. So this is the nice way to adjust your speed. Q and A also moves up and down the camera, which is very handy. If you get lost, let's say that I select this object. Oh, by the way, left click selects an object. And if I'm lost, you can press F key to center the object that you are selecting, which is a very helpful feature, of course. You will notice here in the top corners of the 3D view that you have a bunch of manipulators. So let's start with the from left to right. This will select you the move, rotate, and scale gizmo. You can also do it by pressing W, A, and R. Very handy. And if I rotate something, let's say that I'm rotating this cube here, and then you want to reset this rotation, if you press A, you can select the rotate gizmo, and if you press Alt A, it will reset the rotation. And the same goes for the position. So if I press W to select the move gizmo, and I press Alt W, it will reset the position, and R to scale it, And if I press Alt R, it will also reset the scale. And another cool tip is if I mouse over a place and press G on my keyboard, it will teleport the object to this position, which is very handy again. This is another interesting manipulator. So if you rotate the gizmo, you will see that it will use the objects transform here. And if I enable this option, it will use the world's transform every time. Very simple, and I can switch between them. And this last one is snapping. If I enable it, it will snap the position, the rotation, and the scale. A good shortcut for this, if you don't want to handle like clicking here every time, is holding Ctrl. If I hold Ctrl, you can see snapping is enabled, and if I release Ctrl, snapping is disabled. So another handy feature. This is the show and hide debug grid. You can see that you will have this debug grid. It's disabled by default, but it kind of helps you to have a sense of scale since every grid is 1 meter square. This is an option to execute audio while editing the scene. So if you have any audio emitter, you can enable this to listen to it while you are editing. This is to show and hide the bug lines. At the moment we don't have any of them, but soon you will understand what is this about. And this option here is to show and hide the debug physics. So if you click here, you will be able to see what the game engine will use to take physics into account. So very handy to debug and understand everything that's going on with your scene. Definitely we will be exploring that in the future. And this one is to show and hide the user interface. So if you have any user interface on top of the scene, it will be displayed if this is enabled. Last one is to enable the camera view. So if I have a camera here, this will work to show you what is the camera looking at. So talking about camera and UI, how to add objects here in Cave. First things first, if you hold Alt, you will be able to just click and drag a duplicate of this object. So very handy if you are doing level design. If I just hold Alt key and drag those gizmos, it will create a copy. If I press delete, I will be able to delete this. And another way to duplicate is by pressing Shift D to create another copy. By the way, Ctrl C and Ctrl V is supported, and it is supported between different scenes, which is amazing. So if we select an object here and press Ctrl C, it will be copied here. So you can see that I do have the console saying that it is copied to clipboard. And if I press Ctrl V, it will paste it just fine. But then you can hold Shift A or just right click here in the scene graph to add new object. So if I hold Shift A here, the advantages of pressing Shift A is that the object will be added at the place that your mouse is pointing at. So if I point here, Shift A, new mesh, it will create a cube at this position. So Shift A, let me create a new camera so you guys can see it a little bit better. So this is the camera in Cave. If I click this option, it will show me the camera view. But there is another, and if I click it again, it will allow me to go back to my free mode. But there's a better way to see the camera. So I'll talk about the properties tab. The properties tab, we do have all the properties of every object, and it is relative to what you are selecting. And yes, if you select something in the asset browser, when we will talk about this later, you will see that it will also have options here. So let me select the camera back and go to the properties, and there's a lot going on here. You can change the name, so you can call it main camera here. You can see the entity ID, and I can even go back to the selected property if I want to. So that's very handy. Here's the list of components that the engine uses. Cave Engine is an entity component based system. So as you can see here, the scene, like all the objects here are pretty much entities with a bunch of components in it. And different from other engines, an entity here does not need to have a transform component. I can even select my camera and delete the transform. Of course, it will lead to some weird behavior, so the camera disappears. So let me add the transform here again. I can click add component or right click. And then here we go, I have another component here just fine. By the way, if an entity does not have a transform, it will be considered as a folder for the engine. So if I right click and add a folder, you can see that the folder is just an entity with no components at all. You can add other components to it just fine. So let me delete this folder, go back to my main camera and explain to you some interesting stuff. So if I expand the transform component, you will see that I have all my variables and I can adjust them individually. But the best thing here is the camera component. Of course, I can adjust the field of view and a bunch of other cool stuff. But if I click here in preview, you will see that we will have a preview. Should be working here. Just re-add this camera. Now it is working. All right. So you can see that if I move this camera around, I can place it properly here by looking at the preview, which is very handy if you are creating your levels. All right, moving on, I've reloaded the project so we can start fresh once again. And talking a little bit more about how the scenes and the entities are constructed, because I think this is very important. It is really important for you to understand that everything works in a component based. So if I hold Shift A and add an empty is just an entity with a transform. So I highly recommend that you guys explore all the options that we have right here. So there's nothing by default other than this transform, as you can see again. So if I right click and add, let's say, a 3D graphics, let me add a light here just to have some fun. You can see that now it is bright and I can adjust the radius. I can adjust the intensity. And by the way, this is something very important. If you want like a higher intensity or just a better way to adjust the radius, something that we can do is hold Control and click here to literally type a number. So if I put 10 here, it is a really bright lamp, and this is very handy. It works for every single stuff. So 32, and I can put 30, and here even the transform. So let's say the position I want 2, I can hold Control, click, and then type 2. This is very important for you to understand. Let me change the light color so you can see here that we do have a different light. Great. So now let's try to add a shape to this light. It will be interesting. So I minimize this component, right click and add a 3D graphics mesh here. So I'm adding a mesh. You can see it added a default cube with no material. I can select here the default material and it will have the default color, of course, but let's create a different material. First of all, I'll go ahead and click this cube and add a default sphere instead. So you can see that we do have a sphere. And then I want to make a red glowing material. So I will go ahead in my asset browser, and now this is a good opportunity to introduce you the asset browser. Here's all the folders that you find in your project, so you can double click them to open. You can also use this to go back to the previous folder, and yes, you can click, drag and drop the folder to put them inside other folders. For example, the font does have the Montserrat font by default for you to create your games, and UI style does have some button styles. So you can see here that if you want to make UI, you do have this handy style here to select from. So let's put the font inside the UI style. Right click, UI font inside UI style. Not right click, I drag this. And you can see here that I can manipulate the everything here. Something that I can do is go ahead and right click the folder and click dissolve folder, and it will basically dissolve this folder, and everything that is inside this folder will be part of this current folder, which is very handy. You can go ahead and click here dissolve and it will work just fine. And if your asset browser is looking like a mess, you can right click asset settings and click a group assets, and it will do its best to put everything into folders. And in my opinion, this is very handy, especially if you are not into organizing the project, so it may be a mess very fast. So let me put the font here inside, and I don't like the scene folder. I like having the scenes in the hood, so I can click here dissolve and it will be here. And of course, nothing prevents me. Let me create a new folder here, put the scene inside, and then enter this folder, drag and drop my scene to the hood, and then go back and deleting this folder. You can see that when the folder is empty, it does not have this indicator here. So let me delete. Here we go. So Okay, let's create a new folder, and I will right click and name it assets for all the assets that we will create. And I will click this folder, right click, and I'll click new asset, and I'll create a new material. Let me rename this to glowing red. There's two ways to assign a material to an object. The first one is by clicking here, going to the mesh component and selecting the material, just like you see, or I can just drag and drop the material to the object in the viewport. You can see, same effect. So let me click once in the material, and I can change the albedo color, can put a texture here if I want, and I can change all these variables here, like the roughness and the metallic, and it will work just fine. Also the normal map, so I don't have any texture here, so I'm not gonna add. And let me add an emissive color to this. There's no bloom in this version of the engine, but we will have this in future versions, so don't worry about that. Let me go back to the glowing sphere, and something that is very interesting. So we can see here that we can simulate like a lamp or something like that, but we have even more settings to adjust in the materials. So if we click again the material, you can click here in settings, and for example, you can set it to shadeless, so it will not going to be affected by light. Or you can toggle if you want the back face culling or not. So the inside of the material should disappear if I enable this. Fine. Alpha blending allows me to create transparent objects. You can see that now this sphere is transparent, just fine. If I disable this, by the way, it will use alpha clip if you have a texture here with alpha, and then you'll be able to select the clip by dragging this threshold, which is very interesting. UV scale we're not going to use here, but it will, because there's no texture yet, but it will increase or decrease the scale. And the visibility mask is in which layers this material is visible or not. But now I want to talk about something very interesting. There's this wind option, and if I enable it, you can see that the object became like wobbling, weird, different stuff. But if I adjust this, let's probably reduce the influence here. So 0 influence, it is nothing. But if I add a very slight and small influence, you can see it is kind of looking like wind. And this is very interesting because you can make oceans with this. So this is a wave for the ocean, or you can make, of course, trees. So very easy, we can just wind stuff. And I'm pretty sure that you guys will be able to find some amazing stuff here to simulate the wind. Not only wind, we can use this to everything. By the way, you can click here individual axis to set the wind to individual axis, of course. So very handy as well. So this is pretty much the material. If you click here, by the way, it will update the thumbnail. Very useful as well for you to understand. So let's keep going here. If this object, by the way, if I have physics here in the engine, so if I press P, nothing happens by default. So let's start adding some physics here. Starting with this cube, I want this cube to fall, because if I press P, it does not fall. So if I select this cube and select my rigid body component, a rigid body component is necessary if you want to add physics, like regular physics to anything, including static and dynamic stuff. Because in Cave Engine, what defines if an object will fall or not is this dynamic toggle here. So if I click here to enable, now this object is dynamic, and it should fall. By the way, this version of the engine will reload the components every time if you have them selected. So it will probably not going to be a good idea to play the game with this object selected. You can see that it is falling very slowly. But if I select something else, like the sky here, and if I play, you can see that it will behave as you expect. So keep that in mind. It's always a good idea to deselect this object before playing the game. And let me create a clone here, and you will see this in action. Oh, it is selected. Just said that it is a good idea. Here we go. So we have this behavior. And by the way, this object here, since it does not have any rigid body on it, it will be like, we're not going to have collisions. But here, we already know that if you press this object option here, you'll be able to see the preview. And by the way, I can press P and see this preview in action. Not press P, play the game, sorry. Oh, by the way, again, F5 is a handy shortcut to start and to stop the game. And if you are in game, so if I press F5 and if I want the controls back, I can press F3 to toggle them. So I can go ahead and disable this, for example, and view the camera, use W, A, S, and D. So F3 again, go back to the game. So if I select this and add a rigid body to it, so let me go ahead and add physics rigid body. You can see, can enable this. It will use a box collision by default. I can click here and select a custom shape, for example, the sphere. Of course, it will not gonna take the shader into account, so it's a simple sphere. But now if you play the game, you will see that it is colliding with the sphere. And the sphere is not falling because the sphere is not dynamic. So if I select this object and hit dynamic, the sphere will fall again as well. Sorry. Here we go. So we do have this interesting stuff. By the way, there's a fast way to add the object, like the material itself, the mesh itself as a rigid body. I can just delete the rigid body, go to the mesh component, click here and create rigid body from mesh. It will create the same thing here that we just did. Fine. So let's move on. And talking about selecting the sky, if you select the background, it will allow you to edit the scene. There's another way to do the same thing. So for example, if I'm selecting something, I can click here in this icon to edit the scene, or I can go ahead and click one time in the scene here and I will be able to edit it. I can rename it and just all the other settings. In cave, every scene do have a sun. If you don't want the sun, you can just make intensity go 0 and there's no sun. But every scene do have a sun and you can adjust the settings right here. And the angle of the day will basically define where the sun is in the sky. And you have the time here, and this is in 24-hour time period. So it is very intuitive to set this at noon, for example. Then you have noon shadow. So very easy to adjust the settings as well. You can always adjust the shadows, for example, disable the casting if you are not into shadow or anything like that. You can adjust the influence and everything that you expect from the shadows just fine. You can set mist options as well. To use mist, let me see if I will be able to show this to you. Here we go. And the mist can have an individual color, which is very handy. And you can also add a texture, an ADR texture to the mist. Very handy as well. Talking about textures, it's about time to have some textures here because right now we don't have anything. So let me go in the packages here, and Cave does include a bunch of packages for you. As I said in the beginning of this video, we'll talk about that later on, but for now I'll just include this test grid, which is a test texture here. So click once in the package, you can scroll down, you can see the description, and I'll click import package to project. You can see that now in the root folder I do have a test grid with a bunch of useful stuff. So I can drag and drop this test grid material to the ground, and you can see that it is working just fine. And now let me go back to the scene here and try to use the mist. And now I will add the mist, like this test grid as a mist, and it is using the grid color. It is not the best thing to showcase this because it's just a gray texture, but you get the idea, right? So let me disable the grid and keep going. Ambient and sky is very useful as well. Can change the sky color to anything I want. And yes, I can put an ADR here or just drag and drop this texture here. You can see that now I do have a super weird ADR going on in my scene. Okay, great. Just as an example, of course. And something interesting is that you can also use this to specify the ambient color. By default, it's dark, but I can set whatever I want. The ambient will light everything in the scene. And I can add an ADR to the ambient color as well, which is amazing. Let me go back to black. Maybe not black. By the way, you can blur the sky. So this is very handy. So that I have this sky texture, I can add the blur to it. Can see now I have a blurred background. Super cool. Can adjust the intensity of it and rotate the sky. Let me go back to 0 and rotate the sky, because maybe you want the sun of your skybox to be in a different position, so you can do this. Very easy, very interesting as well. You can adjust some stuff here. For example, if you disable apply shading, check this out. It will, and disable use ambient. So you have a very basic stuff. And if I go to the sun shadows and disable the shadow casting, you can see that now I have a completely blank scene with nothing going on here, just regular lightning. So this is very useful if you're making some cartoonish games. Let me try to add some cartoon color. As you can see, it is possible to have this kind of graphics in Cave. Let me go back to my shadows, and I can adjust this. It's very interesting. I can use ambient lighting just fine with no shading, and of course I can just use the shading. It will look weird with all the shadows. It looks a little bit better. Let me go back to this sky. I like this. So this is how you adjust everything in Cave. By the way, this is post-processing. It's not supported yet. I had to disable all this, but it will be back soon in Cave. And camera here is how you adjust the camera. It does have this very interesting aperture settings that allows you to, I don't know how this is called. So if someone here that is watching is a camera expert, you will understand this, right? This is the render mask, which is pretty much what the camera views. This is the view, but by the way, if you have a camera component, it will override a bunch of this. Every scene can have properties, just like the entity. So if I select an entity, it's the same, so explain it once. You can click here to add Python properties. So if you want to have a health to your object, you can add it like this. And this is a Python properties. This is a Python dictionary. So you can even change the type of this properties to be something else. So very interesting stuff going on here. And it is the same with the scene. The tag is just like the property, but a little bit simpler. It does not have value, and it is faster because it is C++ only. So you should always use the tags in your entities if you are willing to do some scene carries, like let's get all the scene object with a player tag or something like that. You can always use the tags for that. You can use the properties, but as I said, the tags will be faster, because that's why we do have both options here. Settings here will allow you to set a template to an object, but I'll talk about that in a future video. Actually, change my mind. Let me show you the entity templates exactly right now. So let's say that this empty here, this weird slime stuff, let's say that this is an enemy for your game. So let me rename this to enemy. And then let's say that I want to have 10 enemies in my scene. So you can duplicate this enemy just fine, and you have a bunch of them, right? But here's the deal. What if I want to change one of these enemies? How to do this in Cave? Because there's like, now I have 3 different copies of the same object in my scene, and that's not, of course, not ideal. The way Cave solves this is by creating entity templates. So if I right click here the asset, in the asset browser, I can click new entity template, and it will create a blank one for me. And if I double click it, I'll be able to edit this template just fine. So I can create objects just like you can expect. This is a blank scene, so I can create this. And if I go back to my scene, you can see that the template is a cube, and I can drag and drop it to the scene, and it will use the information on this template to build this object. If I go ahead and edit it again, by the way, I can click here to open the editor, or I can select the object and click here, or I can double click here in the scene graph to edit it just fine. And then if I keep adding objects here, so let me add another cube and then change this mesh to be, let's say, a sphere. Okay, and then go back to my scene, you can see that the changes are propagated to all the other objects. So this is a weird template. Let me rename this to weird template. But now I'll show you something interesting. So let's say that you were working in this object in the main scene for a while. What to do if you want to make this a template? Well, an interesting feature for the templates is, let's create a new one. Let me rename this to enemy. Then notice that I do have the enemy selected here. Then I'll click one time here in this template to show this properties, and I can have this build from selected entity option. So if I click here, it will build this template to the selected entity, and if I double click it, you can see that it does have this just fine. Now I can go ahead and delete this entity and add my enemy here. Now we are talking. Now I can have a bunch of enemies. Yay! Awesome. So let's play the game. You can see that everything is working just like you can expect. And by the way, talking about templates again, I will select this one and show you something very important in Cave. You can see that now this object is a child of this root entity. It's a folder, but I can add components to it. The way template works in Cave, first of all, the way child work in Cave is that you can have an object that is a child of other object. I can just select this object in the scene graph and drag and drop it to the other object, and it will become a child. So if the parent moves, the child will move as well. But if the child moves, the parent will not gonna move, just like you can expect. And if I delete or disable the parent, the child will be deleted or disabled. And now the way Cave works with templates is the template will necessarily have one parent here. So if I try to drop this somewhere else, it will not going to work. If I try to create a new mesh, it will also always be a child of this root template, because this is how Cave Engine works. So when you drag this template, when you drop this template to the world, it will basically add a transform component to the root template, and you'll be able to override this just fine. And if I expand this, you can see that I do have all the hierarchy that I created for the template here. By the way, you cannot edit the child of a template. If you want to create like overrides in Cave, what you can do is click once in the template and then go to properties and then add a property. Let's say that this is an enemy. So let's do this with the enemy. It does have the health already, so this is a bad spoiler to what I was about to say. Let's say that I want to add an attack option to my enemy. No, not an attack. Let's add like attack range. Range of attack. And this is a bad option. Spawn point. I'm trying to find a place that I can use like a vector to this. Now I have a spawn point here, which is a vector. And now, since I added this to the enemy, every enemy will have the spawn point here. So if I click here to sync the properties, you can see that I do have a spawn point on every single one of them. And I can override this. And by the way, that's why I said the health was a spoiler, because if you select the enemy template and if you click the root object here, you can see that those properties that the template have are actually the properties that the root entity of the template do have. So very handy for you to edit the templates like that. And of course, you can create the templates and use them into different scenes. So if I right click, new asset, scene, this is a different scene, double click it to see this scene. It does have two lights as a default stuff and those two meshes, and I can drag and drop this just fine, and you will be able to see everything going on and taking action as you expect. Let me add this default grid to it. Awesome. So this is a different scene, and you can see that I do have two scenes now with different settings, different everything. And this is also how you create logic, like different levels in Cave and different stuff. So very handy and very easy to use. Let me save this. Control S saves. By the way, something important. Two things that are important. A lot, actually more than this. First things first. I can zoom in and out the asset browser by clicking here. Some people like it very small, some people like it very big. You can tune it as you want. The second thing is the console. I should have talked about this later, but every time a message appears in the console here, it will appear here in the bottom. So Ctrl S saves the project, and you can see that I do have the message right here, and I can clear the console, of course. Python errors or anything like that will appear here, so very handy as well. Other thing, and this is important, if I click here to play the game, you can see that I can play, of course, but let's say that you want to play this as a standalone. You can go to settings here and click test your game as runtime, and just click save and run standalone player. And if you click here, you can see it created a different window here for you to test the game, and you can see that it works just fine. By the way, it will freeze the engine until you close the standalone. So keep that in mind. Now I'm back with the engine. I accidentally minimized it, but it's very handy to have this option to play it as a standalone. And talking about standalone, if you want to export the game, here you go. You just need to select the startup scene, which is the scene where the game will start, and click here to export for Windows 64. I'm not going to click here because it's very straightforward. It will open the folder with the game exported and ready to go, and you'll be able to share the game with the world. For now, it only exports to Windows and 64 bits. I'm planning to add other options in the future. So keep that in mind. And I have a bunch of useful stuff here, the bug stuff and so on. Talking about the bug, this is a fun fact in Cave. If you go here to tabs, and there's more tabs here that you can expect than the ones that are here. And this statistics for nerds is an interesting one, because Cave actually tracks the progress that you've made into your game. So you can see the time spent doing stuff. For example, for this tutorial, I've spent 27 minutes in this project editing and 1 minute play. So we should play more. The total is 28 minutes. And you can see all the times that I've loaded the project. So again, when I created the project and I said that I've reloaded the project in the middle to start again. So here we go. We have the date here. Fine. And how many times you've doing stuff, you can see here that it does have some debug stuff. So this is just for nerds, just like the name suggests, but I like to have this to see what is going on with my project. One last thing in this video that is important is you can right click here and go ahead and import an asset. So asset settings, import assets, and it will prompt you a Windows window for you to find the asset and import it. It works for textures, FBX, .blend, GLTF, everything that you imagine, and it will import just fine. Keep that in mind that animations for now, I recommend you to test .dai and FBX because they are work in progress. Like the animation importer is work in progress, so you may have some issues with that. If you do, just try a different format. Okay. By the way, you can always drag and drop the asset itself from the file explorer to here, and it will import. Last thing in this video is how to add scripting to it. If I go ahead here in the components, you'll be able to see if I right click and click logic, I can have a Python code. Python code is a very easy way to just add logic to it. So in the start that runs on, can print start, and it will run this logic, and the update that runs every frame can print something here. And if I play the game, you can see it does have a start and then a bunch of updates here. Okay. Oh, it is printing the start and update because I have this selected as a set. Now we have it right. So I have a bunch of updates. If I click again, start, update, and a bunch of updates. But there's another way to add logic to this. And if you want to add, like, again, simple logic, this will be enough. But if you want to add more logic, we can always right click here, new asset, Python script. Now we have a Python script. You can double click it to add it. And then you have a complete editor here inside Cave. So print, start from the script. So you can see the difference. And I will copy this and paste update. Oops, Here we go. So now if I go back to my 3D view and select this object again, right click logic Python component, it will ask me to select the script. Let me rename the script to something interesting like test.py. Then I rename also the component here to test component. Then selecting this object once again, I will select my script, which is a test.py. By the way, you can always drag and drop the script here. And then the component is a test component. That is the component that I do have here. So if I play the game, you can see start from the script and update from the script just fine. Okay. It is updating a bunch of time again because I'm selecting. Here we go. And if I want to add a different one, let's say if I want to have keyboard inputs, I can do if event dot pressed. Let me see if I remember the key binding here in Cave. I believe it's cave dot event dot key underline W. It will work. The user pressed W. Now every time I press W, it will prompt a message. Here we go. The user pressed W. And I'm pressing and it is working just fine. By the way, you will find also everything, literally everything that you need to know when it comes to Python scripting in the Cave Engines documentation. The link will be in the description, and you can also find the documentation by clicking help Cave Engines documentation. You can just click here and the Python API as well, and it will work. You do have the Discord server in Portuguese and English as well for you to jump in and start learning. So this API, if you click here, Python API, it will have a full introduction to the API with everything that you need to know. For example, the events, key codes, all the key codes are here for you to understand everything, how to use them. Events, handling events, you have a full documentation on how to handle events in Cave, how to move an object. You have like the entity stuff for you to understand how an entity works in Cave, and if you go ahead in components, you have the transform component with everything, literally everything, including sample codes here, for example, to rotate the transform in Cave. So you can go ahead and just, for example, let's try to rotate this entity. I have the transform, I just need to get the transform, and then I have the transform.rotate. Okay, let's try this. Go ahead. Getting the transform dot rotate. You can use this as an API 0.10. Then I press P. Here you go. We have the object rotating from Python. If I press W, it still prints the messages. So very simple for you to understand and use the Python API here in Cave. Okay, folks, now we have the last piece of the puzzle that I know you guys have been waiting for, which is the sample code from Cave. Yes, there's a lot of samples here, and I will explain to you how to get them. So if you click here in packages, we already used this in this video for the test grid. You also see that we do have a goblin character. This is just a character for you to use in the projects. If you want, you can click here and import. It will only include this goblin with 2 different skins and a bunch of animations for you to use it. It is very great for testing, and this is like Cave official character for everything. I like it. Some people say that it is very low poly and I should go ahead and use a more high poly and modern stuff, but honestly I like this style. I don't know, let me know in the comments. But here is the important part. You have the Cave demo, and if you click here, you will notice here in the description that I do have the animated character. Yes, it does have this. The vehicle, yep. A test grid. So it is this one that we just imported. It does have it included here, and a bunch of stuff just like the first person, top down, third person example, vehicle example, and policy system, and much more. So go ahead and click here, import package to project. Oops, by the way, I forgot to mention this, but it is not going to work if you import the package after importing other packages that are inside this package. So we do have the test grid, and we do have it in the scene, and since it is used here by the Cave demo, it will completely explode if you do this. I apologize for that. It is still work in progress, but for that, just let's go ahead and delete the test grid and all the materials in it. If you're having a hard time, try creating a new project in Cave before importing this package, okay? So right click, delete the test grid, everything is yellow, is pink now, but for just a moment, because if I click here in the Cave demo and import the package to project, it will work fine and it will replace this test grids with the new ones. But now, in the root folder, you can see that we do have the Cave demo, and inside this, there's a bunch of examples. Yep, a lot of interesting stuff. The Goblin, the test grid is here, as I said, and the Goblin do have like a mesh here, as you can see. It does have a bunch of animations and different sorts of animations, just like this one, but I'm not gonna go into details on this. Jump into my Discord server if you wanna learn this. And the skins as well, it also have 2 different skins for you to use in your projects. So if I go back, I have a bunch of miscellaneous stuff, and I do have vehicle stuff, which is like the vehicle mesh. You can use it. And the vehicle wheel, you can also use it. But more importantly, and by the way, you do have the pause system, which is very good. I made it in a way that you can just like, for example, this is a scene, and if I want to add a pause system to it, I can just drag and drop this template here. And by the way, you can double click and see how it works. It is very simple, uses the Cave UI system. Oh, by the way, this is a good opportunity to show you this button, of course, but it does have everything here and all the code that you need here to pause and unpause the game. So very simple. And go back to my scene, and if I drag and drop this and play the game, now if I press ask, you can see the scene is paused, and if I click resume, it will resume. So a very simple way to pause the scene is by adding this pause system. But now let's talk about the templates. We do have 4. The first one is the first person template. If I hit play, you can see here that it will work just fine, and you have a player movement, a first person movement that you can move with WSD, run with shift, and jump with space, and also look up and down just fine, as you can expect. This is a great way to start your project, and you can see that it does have shadows included. Very simple way to do this. So basically, it does have like a goblin mesh here, but it have an invisible material with shadows. If I go ahead and put a regular one, you can see the goblin is here. But of course, if I play the game now, you will see the face of the goblin inside. Even if I disable the back face, you can see not a good idea. So the way we do this in Cave is by creating a new material, which is the invisible material with shadows. And if I click here to edit this material, the trick here is that in the visibility mask, it does not have any layers but the last one. And if I go to my camera, in the camera component, and if I go here in the settings, in the scene settings, and then hit camera, we do have the render mask with this bit disabled. So it will not gonna render this player, and if I enable the bit, it will. And the shadow do have this bit enabled. Here we go. So that's why it does have shadows. If I disable, it will disappear. So very easy way to do logic here in Cave, right? So this is the first person again. And you can see that this was made with literally 0 logic, 0 Python, 0 scripting, because it does have a character component, does have a player component to walk and run and jump and do stuff. And it does have a camera with the first person component and everything that you can expect from it. So very handy and very simple. And even for the player movements here in the shadows, it does have like just animation with all the logic here. There's no need to write a single line of code to make this first person component happen, which is very interesting. Let's go to the top down, and same goes to the top down. There's no logic here. Literally 0 logic. And the only thing that does have logic here in this demo is the pause menu. So if I hit pause, you can see there's a very little logic here to just pause the scene and add this and activate this entity with the pause control. You can see the character moves around, the character jumps, and the camera follows the character, and it does have the same behavior as the as the character that we just saw in the first person, except for the camera. The camera is here, it is not a parent of the player, and it does have the top-down camera component with a bunch of cool like settings, and you can even adjust the settings here in real time and see them affecting. So you can see that I've changed the minimum and maximum distance, so the camera would take longer to start following the player. So again, I highly recommend that you spend some time trying to figure out every value of this, because that's exactly why this demo is here for you to hack around and figure out exactly how it works and how you can use it in your projects just fine. Then you have the third person camera. So it is the exact same thing. The only difference here is a camera, because the camera do have here, oops, not the pulse control, the camera do have here a third person camera. Yep, we do have a camera for this with a bunch of settings. I highly recommend you that you play around with this. And again, zero code, zero scripting required. It even have a badass camera collision here. And this camera collision, by the way, uses a very interesting approach with a sphere cast. So you can set the radius. So you can see that we can just play around just fine with this character. Jumps and do everything that you expect. And last but not least, we do have the vehicle component. It is work in progress, so keep that in mind. If I select the vehicle, you will see in the vehicle component that there's a warning, and the vehicle controller, there's a warning. The wheels as well, they all have a warning because vehicle component is work in progress. So this is just a player for scale and just for the sake of having a good screenshot here, by the way. And if I play here, you see that the vehicle does have like steering, does have suspension and so on. But by the way, I'm not a car guy, and it turns out that this uses like bullet physics, and it uses like real life approach for adjust the vehicle. But since I'm not a car guy, I have no idea what to put in the suspension, the friction, and so on. So I tried my best to create a vehicle example here. It is a little bit janky, but it's not exactly engine's fault. It's just like user fault, because I'm terrible with it. So that's why it keeps like stopping and the wheel is slipping around. So yeah, keep in mind it is work in progress, but it also means that I'm not a car guy. I'm a terrible car person. So yeah, feel free to make a better one and use this sample as a starting for the project. I'll be interested to see what you will be able to make with using it. So, well, yeah, this is pretty much everything in this. Oh, by the way, the pulse do have a pulse example, which is just simple scene with the pulse system here for you to understand. Does have a Python script here. So this is the only script, the only time that you see a script in Cave. So yeah, I think this shows everything that I wanted to show as an introduction to Cave. Oh, by the way, I just noticed that this sample mesh does have some problems. I should re-import this. I will do that later. So anyways, this is pretty much Cave Engine in a nutshell for you to learn and understand exactly how it works and how you can use it to create your project. I'm very excited and I can't wait to see you guys using it and hacking and do all sorts of cool stuff with the engine. Make sure you are on my Discord server so we can discuss about it. If you have any suggestions, any questions, just feel free to post there and I will be glad to answer. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you guys for this amazing support during all this year. This is a dream coming to a realization. I'm very happy about it and I can't wait to see what you all will be able to do with it. So my name is Guilherme, thanks for watching and I see you on my Discord server.